If you're happy, you radiate happiness, and it's almost like a little ball of sunlight going around, and you can make other people's days. I live here in Brookdale in Southwest Seattle. Initially, I came in because I have IPF, idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. My life expectancy was 3 to 5 years, and I'm now in my 4th year. I don't know how I'm doing it. I'm just not getting any worse. I really enjoy the conversations that I have here with people. Just being with people has taught me so much about the healing power of friendship. I like to be there with people. I love to hold their hands when they're going through things. I love to give hugs around here. Gosh, I don't know, I just love life. If I can do something to make this world a better place, I'm going for it, man.
Can you believe it? We've been married 50 years.
Brookdale Assisted Living has been so helpful. We couldn't do this without them.
Now, if you'll excuse us, may I have this dance?
My name is Marjorie Reese. I'm 99 years young, and I make dolls. When I retired, my husband and I made a lot of tours, road trips, and we went to all the states. And then he got into computers, and that's when I started making dolls. When we go shopping, I'd look at the dolls, and I found this kit. It was painted, but it wasn't put together. There was a lady at the senior center, and she was a teacher. She helped me put it together, and I dressed it and everything. For 10 years, I went to the senior center to make dolls. And she told people, when Marjorie came, she had 1 doll, and now she has over 100. Oh, I've had more than that, maybe 180. My husband always helped me glue the arms and legs on. And when I got one finished, I'd take it to, and I said, well, here's one finished. He said, oh, that's the prettiest one yet. Oh, I couldn't have done it without him. I made the sailor boy because he was in the Navy. But when I started dressing it, when I'd hear him coming upstairs, I'd hide the clothes, and he didn't know it till I got it all dressed. And he was really touched when he saw it. I have some baby dolls, and they have dresses made out of my mother-in-law's blouses, and that means so much to me. Sometimes things just drop in your life, you know, like me meeting that teacher from the senior center. She just dropped in my life and changed it.
Today's the day, people! We're moving to Brookdale! New home, new friends, and the associates have been a huge help. We don't have to worry about cooking and taking care of the house, so she gets more time to relax with me. This place is great.
On the next episode of Make It Mine, we'll meet Boyd Armstrong, the vivacious resident at Brookdale West University. As a former extra in the Houston Opera and a career service coordinator, Boyd is still wild about connecting with others. His social calendar is buzzing, but Boyd needs a living room that's as fun as he is. Designer Pamela O'Brien is an expert at helping her clients find their style, so this is the perfect match.
Oh my. Welcome to the Grateful Life webcast. I'm your host, Ashley Eicher. Our topic on today's show is Happiness Through Change, findings from a lifetime study with our guest, Dr. Robert Waldinger. Now, one thing is certain in life, and that is change. We build resiliency through taking on the battles that transition brings and by building happiness through our relationships. Our guest today is an expert on the topic of building your happiness, and he manages a significant study on what it takes to bring true happiness. Robert, thank you so much for joining us today. It is so great to see you.
I'm really glad to be here.
All right, so tell me just a little bit about this study that started, was it 75 years ago?
It was 86 years ago.
86 years ago.
Almost 87.
So tell me a little bit about the study, how it came to be and why it started.
Sure. So this is the longest study of the same people through their entire lives that has ever been done. It's 724 families. Started in 1938, and it started as two studies that didn't know about each other, but both were studies of how young people can develop. It started with a group of Harvard College undergraduate students who were chosen by their deans as fine, upstanding young men, and it was meant to be a study of how people developed from adolescence to early adulthood. Now we would never choose a group of all white guys from Harvard to study normal development, but that was what they did at that time. And the other study was a study of children from Boston's poorest neighborhoods and their most troubled families. And these were kids in families that were known to 5 social service agencies on average for domestic violence, severe parental mental illness, physical illness. So these were kids born into hardship.
Yeah.
And the question was, how do these children stay on good developmental paths, stay out of trouble, and develop well? So both were studies of thriving. One a very privileged group of Harvard students, one a very underprivileged group. And that was radical for that time because most of the research is on what goes wrong in human development. So this was what goes right. And that's what's unique.
What are some of the insights that you discovered just from a high level over this 80-year study?
Well, 2 things. One won't surprise anybody. It's that if you take care of your health, it really matters for living long and living healthy. So eating well, exercise, not being obese, not abusing alcohol and drugs, all of that matters, getting regular health care. But the thing that surprised us was that the people who stayed the healthiest and lived the longest were the people who were most connected to other people and had the warmest relationships. We didn't believe those findings when we first saw them because we thought, well, how could relationships actually get into your body and shape your health? Mm-hmm. But it turns out many other studies have found the same thing. We now know this is a real scientific fact. So we've been spending about the last 10 years in our laboratory trying to figure out how this works. How do warm relationships keep us healthy?
Can you define warm relationships for us? What do you mean by that?
Warm relationships are just what they sound like. They are emotionally warm. They're friendly. And warm relationships don't have to be without conflict. They're not smooth all the time. I mean, actually, no relationship that's important is without differences between people, but the magic is in how we work out our differences with other people so we both end up feeling good. Mm-hmm. But some of the components of warm relationship, for example, are feeling like it's a relationship where I can basically be myself, that I don't have to squash aspects of who I am or how I feel. The other thing about warm relationships is there's usually mutuality. Now, of course, it's different with a small child, but with 2 adults, for example, it's like there's a lot of give and take, that I'm not the only one doing all the taking or doing all the giving. I'm not the only one doing all the listening or doing all the talking, right? So there's a give and take, and that makes relationships feel good and warm. And then another thing about warm relationships is that they allow the other person not just to be who they are, but to change over time. Because if you think about it, we're always changing. Life brings new things all the time. And sometimes the people in our lives say, I don't want you to change. I don't want you to have different interests. I don't want you to have different needs. And of course, as we get older, we have different physical needs. And so all of that means doing our best to accept each other as changing people over time. And hopefully people accept our changes as well through time. So all of those are some of the elements of what we think of as good, warm relationships.
Well, I love that you mentioned something in the very beginning of what you said, of where a lot of times people will filter parts of themselves to be loved. And so I love that you talk about in relationships and warm relationships and really finding happiness, it is about being loved and accepted for who we truly are and not trying to filter any of those parts of ourselves. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. I bet we've all had the experience of feeling like, oh my gosh, I have to watch what I say. I have to be really careful with this person. That expression, walking on eggshells. Sometimes we feel like that with another person. That's a relationship that's not comfortable. And so the question is there a way to move that relationship to the point where I don't feel like I'm walking on eggshells, or I don't make you feel like you're walking on eggshells, right? It means, I can tell the jokes I tell, and that I can be as open about myself as I want to be without feeling judged or criticized. It's a hard thing to do, but it's something we can learn to do with each other.
Well, and I think for so many people, we spend so much of our lives running from different things, or we spend our time chasing things in life that really don't matter when you really get to the end of your life. So can you talk about, from what you have learned in tracing people's lives over the last 80 years, what have you seen that people really tend to care about when they're at the end of their life? What are the things they go back to that matter the most to them?
We actually asked people this. So when our 724 couples got into their 80s, we asked them to look back on their lives, and we asked them what they were proudest of and what they regretted the most. And what people said they were proudest of was always something to do with their relationships. I was a good partner. I was a good parent. I was a good boss. I was a good mentor. I was a good brother or sister, right? So it was always about relationships. It was never, I earned $1 million or I did this. No, it wasn't about their accomplishments in that way. It was really about, or I did good work. One of our surgeons said, I did good, careful work, and I kept people safe. So that was what they were proudest of. The things people regretted were the things that won't surprise you. Many people said, I wish I hadn't spent so much time at work. I wish I had spent time with the people I care about. And the other thing people said, actually women said this more than men, was, I wish I hadn't worried so much about what other people thought. So again, it was about, I wish I could have been myself more of the time.
Right. Well, and not filtered. Going back to what we talked about just a minute ago, not filtering those parts of ourselves, or again, worrying about what other people think about us.
Yeah.
What types of relationships have you found really contribute to a healthy well-being? I know you mentioned warm relationships, but are there particular ones?
Well, all relationships count, and that's what's surprising. Like we think, oh, it's just our nearest and dearest, but it turns out that's really important. Like, first of all of us need at least one or two people in the world who we feel really have our back, that if I'm in trouble, I can call you and you'll be there for me. So that's really important. But then work relationships turn out to be really important. That it turns out that having a good friend at work makes you happier, it makes you a better worker. And that includes volunteer work, that includes all these settings. Rather than thinking of work as separate from the rest of my life, it's all of one piece when we're talking about relationships. So work relationships matter, family, friends, volunteer work. Also, one of the things that research has shown us is that casual relationships really matter. So the person you say hello to in the grocery store who checks you out in the checkout line, right? The person who you have a nice little chat with in the coffee shop when you get your coffee, the Uber driver who you talk to, those things give us little hits of well-being. They make us feel like we belong, like we're connected to other people. So it's really important not to discount those relationships that sometimes we call superficial, but turn out to really make a difference in our happiness.
Are there any stories from the study participants that you have that you feel like really support what you're saying and the findings?
Yes. So in our book, The Good Life, we followed a bunch of people from our study, but we talked about the person who was the happiest and the person who was the least happy among our 724 original people. And the happiest man was a guy who, he had gone to Harvard and he wanted to be a writer and wanted to have a big career, but he came home from serving in World War II and his mother was ill. He had to take care of her. He needed a job. So he got a job as a high school history teacher. That's where he stayed for his whole career. Wow. And he loved it. He loved his students. He loved his colleagues. He had a happy marriage, 3 daughters who he adored, lots of grandchildren, and he prioritized people. He prioritized his students, his children and his grandchildren, teaching them to sail, having his children build a sailboat with him. He was so excited about that, right? The other person, the least happy person, prioritized achievement. And partly because he was kind of shy and he'd been bullied as a kid in school. So he didn't feel like relationships were safe to engage in. And so he achieved a lot, but he was pretty isolated. And his health broke down sooner. He had 2 unhappy marriages, difficult relationships with his children. And so it was a really vivid picture of 2 opposites. One man who prioritized his relationships and one man who didn't, who maybe couldn't.
Well, I think it's interesting you bring this up. You know, when we talk about relationships, how do your relationships and happiness affect our mental and emotional health? And physical health, honestly.
Yes. Well, they have a huge effect. So that's what we've been figuring out in our laboratory in the last 10 years. Like, how does that actually work? Like, why would that affect us? Well, the best theory we have of this is that it has to do with stress. So stress is a natural part of life. You know, I'm having a good time now, but an hour from now, something really stressful might happen. My body will change. My heart rate will go up. My blood pressure will go up. I'll start breathing faster, right? And that's normal. That's the body's natural response to a challenge, not a problem. When the stressor is removed, the body is meant to go back to equilibrium. Right. And most of us do that. But the theory is that one of the ways we do that is through good relationships. If I have something upsetting happen and I can come home and call a friend or talk to my wife, I can literally feel my body calm down again, right? We know that many people have nobody they can talk to, no one they can call, nobody at home. And that those people, we think, stay in a low level of agitation, where they have higher levels of circulating stress hormones, their immune systems break down, their joints break down, their coronary arteries break down because of this low level of stress hormones and inflammation that happens when we don't have those warm relationships to help us get back to baseline. That's our best theory of how this works.
Yeah, and I really want to dive more into that. But before we get to that, are there any surprises for you that have come out of this study? Is there anything that's really surprised you?
Well, certainly the relationship finding itself surprised me. So look, I mean, I'm a Harvard professor. I could work 24/7, right? And once my kids were grown and launched, I realized I was working all the time because it was kind of the thing I just went to when I didn't have anything else to do. And I realized from my research, if I keep doing that, I'll have no friends.
Yeah.
And so I started essentially practicing what I preach. And I started.
That's good,
like,
Bob. That's good. Practice
yeah,
what you
exactly.
preach.
But it meant, like I'm a guy and I'm not used to like calling up my friends and saying, let's go have dinner together.
Yeah.
Let's go take a walk together. Like women do that more easily, I think, because they've been socialized as girls and young women to do that more because I think they saw their mothers, many of them do that. And so guys don't do that. And so I started doing more of it. And my male friends and some female friends too, but my male friends really appreciated it. They wouldn't reach out to me, but they really liked it. Everybody said yes when I said, let's go have dinner. And so what I found was that taking some of my own medicine was important from this study.
Well, and I think too, if I think about the environments that even my grandparents grew up in, they were taught not to talk about their feelings, not to talk about things that they were walking through. It was like, let's just bury it. And so I have to wonder too, from what you've learned in this study, how has that impacted people's health over a long period of time versus where my generation, we are much more open to talking about what is going on in our feelings and that type of connection to help heal and build relationships. So what have you found between the two?
Well, you're absolutely right that the older generations, the World War II generation, most of whom have passed away, but also even some of my generation, the baby boomers, in many families, the message is don't talk about your feelings, stuff it down, just get over it. And what we know from good research is that it makes us worse. It makes us more depressed, more anxious. It makes us more afraid of other people, all that bad stuff. So if we can teach ourselves and our children and our grandchildren that feelings are fine, feelings are fine to talk about, that is such a gift we can give them. It's really important.
Well, and how does that anxiety, depression, we talk about how those like low level stress, the way it harbors in the body, when you see anxiety, depression, or even grief, how does that impact happiness over the long term, if not healed or worked through?
Well, as we said, so it breaks down your physical health slowly, but it also breaks down your sense of being okay, that life is okay. And it makes you feel less than, especially when we look around. If you look around at social media or even just watching TV, watching movies and commercials, it looks like everybody else is living their best life except me, right? And so that sense of not being okay, not being able to be myself, makes me compare myself to other people. And a lot of times what we compare ourselves to are these artificial pictures of lives where everybody else says, I'm great, everything's great. No life is great all the time, of course. So partly it's being able to share our trials and tribulations, being able to share our vulnerability with other people that's so healing and so enlivening compared with having to keep it all to ourselves.
What are some of the things that you've found in the study to be able to reverse that? Or has there been anything that can help you reverse those types of things in your life?
Oh, absolutely. So for example, I'm a psychiatrist and my specialty is psychotherapy. I see patients every day, and a lot of what we do is talk about, well, what would happen if you actually expressed your feelings about this to your friend or your partner? And so therapy can help, but also lots of support groups, including social activities, volunteering in the community, going to a house of worship often because those communities are very accepting usually, and and good places to be. There are a lot of ways we can remedy the sense of isolation and the sense of having to keep ourselves closed off from others.
One of the exercises my counselor uses with me, and I'm interested to know if you use this with some of your clients as well, is like when I'm rehearsing the worst case scenario, it's like, okay, well, then what could happen? And then we go through that. And then she's like, and then what? And then what? So eventually I'm like, yeah, it's fine. And then how do I work through, if it's a relationship with this person, to heal that or make amends and kind of move on? And it's amazing the release that happens when you just put that practice into practice.
Exactly, because often we tell ourselves stories and we don't even know what we're afraid of. And then when someone asks us, like your counselor, I ask people, I say, okay, now let's play this movie out. Show me what happens next. Show me what happens next. And often when people say, well, here's what I'm afraid of. And then once we trot it out and bring it into the light of day, it doesn't look so scary.
Right.
And we can even practice what we'll say. We'll practice how we'll bring a difficult subject up and what will happen if the person gets angry and how we can calm things down. A lot of times just rehearsing it in our minds, especially rehearsing it with a trusted person,
Yes,
can really help us get to a point where we can have that uncomfortable conversation. And often it goes much better than we expect it to.
I agree. What are some of the barriers that exist in either maintaining or building relationships as we get older?
Yes. Okay. Big barrier is physical health. So when we lose our physical health, first of all, we don't feel as good, right? So we don't have the energy to connect. Also, sometimes we're just not able to get around as much. Our mobility is less. And that's another obstacle to really keeping people in our lives and socializing. That's actually one of the ways that the digital world can help us. We can connect with other people on Zoom, for example. Like older adults now connect with grandchildren who are far away or grandchildren who can't come see them for one reason or another. And there's so much ability to connect over video that we didn't have before.
Right.
So that's a help. But often it's getting over the sense of, well, people won't want to see me if I don't look as good, if I need to use a walker or a cane, people won't want to see that. Well, actually, most people are fine with that. And so some of it is getting over some of the hurdles of saying, okay, this is how I am now. And I'll be fine socializing with people, being with people, even though my health has changed. And that's one of the things we need to support each other in doing.
Well, one of the things that I've noticed in members of my family is that especially retirement has impacted their decisions to go out and either build new relationships or maintain relationships. I think there's this mentality of, well, I've worked for 50 some odd years and now I just want to sit on my couch and watch television, but that isn't always good for your health either. And you're not really building relationships. So can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, it's not good for your health. We had, when our original generation, our first generation retired, many of them, had worked their whole lives, busy jobs, and then they had a celebration, they got the gold watch or whatever, and they went home and they sat down on the couch and they looked around and said, where is everybody? They had taken their workmates for granted. Like you just take all, I see these people every day and some of them are nice, some of them are annoying, but they're like the air you breathe. You take them for granted and then suddenly nobody's there. You're home alone or just with one other person. And, the temptation to sit on the couch all day long with the TV on is great. And it is really important to overcome that inertia because when we do, we're happier. So, we often, like you probably have had this experience I have where someone will say to me, come on, let's go out tonight. Let's be with some people. And I'll say, no, I'm just going to stay home. I'm going to sit on the couch and watch Netflix. And when I actually make myself get up and go and be with people, I am so much happier almost always. And that's what we find. Actually, there's research on this. So when we get over that little hurdle of, oh, it's so much easier to stay home and sit on the couch. When we get over that hurdle, we're much happier, we're more energetic, we stay younger longer. That's the message.
Do you have any advice for people like me who are trying to encourage people in my family to be more active and to not stay on the couch? Do you have, and encouraging them to stay in those relationships and continue to build and maintain those, do you have any practical advice for me on how to approach that?
Yes. Don't give advice. Nobody wants my advice, right? You know, bring them up off the couch, right? Say, I'd like you to go with me to do this thing. Let's go together to this concert. Let's go together to this talk that's happening in our community. Let's, come to church with me. I want to go. Will you come with me? I really don't want to go alone. Will you come with me, please? So that you essentially, rather than telling somebody what to do, you warmly invite them and actually even say, it would really help me if you come with me, right? That makes people feel needed. So one of the things we know as we get older is one of the big questions everybody asks is, do I still matter? Right? And everybody wants to matter, right? And it's really easy when you're older to feel like I don't matter anymore. So what if you, with your older family members, say, boy, it would really matter to me if you come with me to do this thing.
You mentioned this, but people start to lose a sense of purpose as they age. So they're not taking care of kids anymore. They're not working full time. How does not feeling a sense of purpose in our everyday life contribute to unhappiness?
We know this actually from good research, but also common sense, as you're saying, that all of us need to feel like we've got a reason to get up in the morning. We got a reason to get out of bed, right? And that's the purpose. It's what gets you up in the morning. And I'm going to tell you a story that illustrates this. So the National Academy of Science was doing a study of how do we get older people to exercise more. And so they started doing all these advertisements saying, you're not going to be as healthy, you're going to die sooner. All that scare tactics didn't affect anything. Then they started making beautiful photographs of older women holding babies. And the caption was, be there for the people who need you. And that motivated lots of people to get up and go do exercise, to go walking, to do the things that were good for them. So we all need to feel like we have a reason to be in the world, right? And that's something you can find with time. A lot of it involves checking in with yourself. What do I enjoy? What do I get a kick out of? What feels meaningful to me? I mean, think about now, there's so much hatred in the world. There's so much distress. There's so much division. Maybe you want to work for a cause that you care about, that tries to calm everything down. Maybe you're worried about climate change. Maybe you care about orphaned children. Whatever you care about, find a way to do something that makes you feel you're doing something to make the world better. One of my teachers once said to me that one of the best questions we can ask ourselves is, what do I want to live in the world because I was here?
Yes. What is your legacy?
What is your legacy? If I can answer that question, that's purpose.
I love. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I cut you off.
Well, I was going to say it might be that grandchild you're going to help take care of, or you're going to make food for your children while they take care of the baby, or whatever. Just anything or it might be mentoring a younger person, showing them your carpentry skills. It might be anything. Just so long as you see what you'd like to make sure you pass on to other people.
I was gonna say, I love the image you talk about of, a grandmother taking care of a grandchild or holding a grandchild, and just that age dynamic and the joy that is brought from that. So how do families tie into happiness?
Well,
And their
families
relationships?
Yeah, well, families can tie into happiness and deep unhappiness, right? So there are ways to make unhappy relationships happier, but families are a great source of happiness, cohesion, belonging, so good. Um, they're really important. Now, many of us don't have families, but that means we can choose our families. And some people will say, I've got a group of friends who are family for me. That works just as well for all the benefits we've been talking about, of relationships. Um, and of course, families can give us a sense of purpose. From the smallest child to the oldest adult in a family, if we all have ways we can help out, that's hugely important. The smallest child learns to clear her place from the dinner table, and the oldest adult learns to, helps out with the grandchildren and feels like that's important.
Right.
So that's all really important. The other thing we learn is that families where there are feuds are unhappy families. And if you can do everything in your power to heal a feud, you are doing such a service to yourself, first of all, if you're part of the feud, and to everybody else.
Do you have any tips on how to heal a family feud or make amends if that is a situation you are in?
Yeah. Well, first, to let go of your version of reality, to at least be open to another point of view, right? Because usually a feud is based on this idea of you have wronged me, you have been terrible, right? And it's certainty. It's absolute certainty. And one of the things we know is that there are many ways to look at the same thing that happens in a family, in life, right? So just remind yourself, okay, this person may have a completely different version of what happened, and it may have meant something totally different to them than it meant to me. If you can start in that place and say, could we talk about this? I realize that I have one version of what happened, but I don't really know your version, and I'd like to learn what it was like for you. If you could be open in that way, that's a place to start. And many people will come along with you and have that conversation.
Well, and as we've been talking about relationships, we've talked a lot about happiness, but I can't help but think about the opposite end of that, and that's loneliness. So you can talk about the findings from the study on loneliness, how it impacts our lives, and how it impacts our health.
Yes. One of the things we know now is that loneliness is everywhere. Like 1 in 3 or 4 people in the United States will tell you that they are lonely much of the time. That's enormous. And it's increasing all over the world, this sense of isolation. And we know that it breaks down health. We know that loneliness makes us feel more depressed, more anxious. Again, as we said before, we don't have that way of managing stress when we're lonely. And loneliness is a stressor. So if you know people who are lonely, it's such a gift to reach out to those people. Right? It's a wonderful gift you can give to that person. If you are lonely, find ways to change that. So, for example, volunteer. Actually, volunteer to help people who are lonely. Like if you go, if you volunteer for, a homeless shelter, or you volunteer for a soup kitchen, or you volunteer to tutor a little child in reading, not only does it help someone else, but you are less lonely. So all of those things are possibilities to ease loneliness.
When I also have to think too, one of the things I've always heard is if you think about somebody, there is a reason. So just reach out and just say, I'm thinking about you, especially if you know it's someone that is lonely or alone a lot of the time. that just little bit of outreach can mean so much to someone who is feeling lonely.
Absolutely. I mean, just a little text
Yeah.
or an email or a phone call means so much. In fact, sometimes when I give talks, I will ask people toward the end of the talk, okay, now take out your phone and just send a little text or an email to somebody who you miss and just say, hi, just thinking of you. And then during the end of the talk, the question and answer, I'll say, did anybody get anything back from their text? All these hands shoot up and say, my friend was so happy I reached out, or my friend just had surgery and they were so glad that I contacted them, or I've already got a dinner date for next week. So do these small little things. They mean a lot, as you say.
Well, and I think too, so often I know as family members of mine have aged, one of the things I would just be like, just reach out to me. And they were like, well, I don't want to bother you. I know you're busy. I know you're working. I know you're doing this. And so, you know, how have you seen for when we reach out to someone that we care about because they happen to be on our mind, how have you seen the changes in mood or behavior for the person receiving that outreach in your study? How has that impacted their life and happiness?
It's almost always positive. I never hear of people who say, I don't want you to reach out to me. Like first of all, everybody wants to be thought of, right? Everybody wants to be remembered. And so just the fact that you're reaching out to say hi means I'm thinking of you. And especially if that person feels like nobody in the world really cares whether they live or die, that a little hello from you can mean the world.
You know, there are a lot of people in our audience who have experienced a lot of life changes. So maybe it's a loss of a loved one, a loss of mobility, and there are a lot of things that are just out of their control. So how can someone maintain balance as they're working through some of these things that they just really don't have control over?
That's so important because a lot of life we don't have control over, and Lord knows aging we don't have control over completely. We have some. We can do the things to keep ourselves healthy, but then a lot of it is just luck, right? It's just what happens. So I think what we do is we work with what we can. We take care of what we can. We heal. We do all the rehab exercises we need to, right? We do that work because it's really important. So we don't give up, but we also accept what we can't change, because a lot of graceful aging is accepting the fact that we're getting older and accepting the things we can't change. You know, the serenity prayer that says, yes, you know, grant me the strength to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Wisdom, and yeah, and the thing, and the grace to accept the things I can't change, and the wisdom to know the difference. That's, boy, aging is that serenity prayer for sure.
I love that. I love that example. In your work, you talk a lot about the differences between loneliness and isolation. Can you talk about some of those distinct differences that you found?
Yes, because so loneliness is a feeling that I have inside of me. Now, you can be lonely in a marriage. You can be lonely in a crowd, right? Loneliness is just that feeling of, I feel less connected to other people than I want to feel. You can also not feel lonely as a hermit living on a mountaintop. No problem, if that's what's good for you. So that's the subjective part. Then isolation is physical isolation, usually geographical isolation. So that happened to all of us during the pandemic, right, when we were locked down and we couldn't see each other. It happens sometimes for people in rural communities. There's a lot of isolation, particularly for people who lose a spouse. And so isolation is something we can overcome usually by just finding ways to physically be near to other people. Loneliness is harder because there are many different causes of loneliness. Sometimes loneliness is based on a mental health issue, based on depression or anxiety, where there are lots of people around, but we're just afraid of connecting or feel like nobody wants us. So there are a lot of different things we can do. The first is to try to figure out what's causing my loneliness, and then how can I remedy it? Maybe it's getting some mental health care. Maybe it's talking to a counselor. Maybe it's using some medication. There's some really good medications that can help with depression and anxiety. And, maybe it's, as we said, doing some of these things like joining clubs, volunteering. So there are a lot of different solutions depending on the cause of the loneliness.
What are some of the really practical steps for building depth and connectedness in relationships? We've talked a little bit about how important that is, but what are some of the practical steps?
Yeah. So practical steps are like FaceTime. We talk about this phrase FaceTime, and it means how much time are you actually putting in with this other person? So one of the things we know is that if you really want to be close to somebody, see them regularly, call them regularly, talk to them regularly, right? Don't just say, oh gosh, we see each other twice a year and we're good friends. Well,
Right.
Yes, that's possible. But if there's really somebody you want to keep in your life, make a date to talk every week. So my friend who I wrote this book with, The Good Life, my friend Mark Schultz, who's my collaborator, every Friday at noon, we have a phone call. We've done this for 35 years.
Wow.
And yeah, we talk about our work, but we also talk about our families and, and getting older and all this stuff. And it's really important because otherwise we wouldn't be in each other's lives. Mark lives in Philadelphia. I live in Boston. I never see him, but I talk to him every week.
Right.
So I would say make regular times to be in touch with the people you most want to be in touch with.
What have you found for how important that FaceTime is? Real FaceTime, like sitting in a room with someone across from them, as opposed to technological FaceTime, which I do love because it allows me to talk to my nephew on a regular basis. But how important is that face-to-face connection in the physical environment?
We don't know. There's research going on now, like what actually is the difference between FaceTime, Zoom, and being in person, right? In real life, as the young people call it. And
Look at you, Bob, just dropping the IRL right there, the in real life.
Really. You can teach an old dog new tricks, well, a few. But one of the things that we don't know yet is what gets filtered out when we're on a remote platform. Like you and I are having a really nice conversation. It's pretty good.
Right.
Given that we're not together in the same room. So we don't want to say that doesn't work, that doesn't help. I think it is possible to have good relationships, remotely at times. But boy, if we can be in person, I don't know if you remember what it was like the first time you were with a group of people in person after the lockdown of the pandemic.
Oh, yeah.
There was this it was like, oh my gosh, this is so wonderful.
I think we all felt like we could run through a wall. We were just so excited to be together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's an indicator of how much has to get bottled up when we can't be in person with each other. So I would say try your best to be there in person with each other, but don't give up on FaceTime and Zoom and those remote things because they help too. They help stay connected.
What are some regular habits or practices that can help us build a good life later in life?
Okay. First of all, stay active.
Yeah.
Stay active. Don't let yourself settle into, oh, I'm just going to sit here and not do these things. Don't give things up before you have to. During the pandemic, I stopped commuting to my hospital every day. I used to commute every day, and so I don't do that anymore. But then I began to say, well, I don't really want to drive over to this other place to be with these people. And so I started saying, I'm getting lazy. I don't want to drive anymore. Well, I've made myself stop doing that. It's really important to keep challenging yourself. The other thing we can do is learn something new. So is there something either that you used to know and you want to do again, like maybe you played an instrument, or maybe you always wanted to sing? I've started taking voice lessons, and
You
my
have?
wife has, yeah, I started this in my late 60s. I never thought I could sing. My wife started this too. We have a voice teacher.
I love
I'm now learning to accompany myself on the piano and sing. And I'll tell you, my brain is like, it's like such a challenge for my brain. I'll tell you this, because this is something you can do if you like languages. Maybe you used to study French or Spanish or, Russian. I used to study Spanish, really enjoyed it. I now have a Spanish tutor. Every Friday at 11 a.m., I get on a Zoom call with Javier, who lives in Granada, Spain. And Javier and I speak Spanish for a whole hour. It's not expensive at all. He's a great teacher. There are lots of great teachers out there who will, and we have such a great time. He's a lovely guy. He tells me about his life in Spain. I tell him about my life in the US. You could, in other words, pick up an old hobby that you used to enjoy. Maybe join a chorus if you like to sing, or, take music lessons again. Take golf lessons, learn pickleball, learn something new.
I love that you said that. My grandmother started painting in her early 60s.
Yes.
And she passed away at 70, and her paintings are what I have hanging in my house. Like, she had a gift for it, and she loved it. And it allowed her to socialize with other people. And it developed that creativity that she could use later in life. So I love that you said that you were learning Spanish again, that you are taking voice lessons. I mean, you and your wife could start a band at this point.
Yeah, well, we've done we've done duets. She and I have done some duets, and we do some choruses with other people. It's really fun.
Go ahead. Yeah. Sorry.
No, I was just gonna say that again, the trick is to find something you've either always wanted to learn about, or that you used to love and that you could rekindle.
What are some of the daily habits that people could implement to build connection and socialize more? Even if they just need to start small.
Start small. Small actions. Again, as we're saying, send a text, send a voicemail, pick up the phone. It's not heavy lifting. And if you say, well, I'm so busy, I can't do that, I can't add more time, do it, call somebody while you're on a walk, or, invite someone to go on a walk with you to socialize. If you do something regularly, or if you go to the gym, ask somebody to meet you there and do your workout together. There are ways you can do this without adding a big burden or adding a lot of time to your day.
So what are some of the examples from the studies in helping to rebuild connection with people that you have lost touch with?
Yes, well, you can find them. One of the nice things is that many people now we can find on the internet. And so when you've lost touch, look them up. Maybe they're on Facebook, maybe they're on one of the other social media platforms. See if you can find them. Just send them a little message. They might not answer because they might not check their social media messages, but just check it out. See if you can find their email. Just send them a little note. It's low risk. The worst that can happen is somebody doesn't respond. Right. But many times, more times than not, people will say, I'm so glad you got in touch. And then you catch up on your lives. And then, I've become friends again with people I knew in kindergarten. Somebody I played with when we were 3 years old, we've rekindled our friendship, and she just had surgery, so I'm checking in on her. She lives across the country, but, and people are so happy to be in touch again.
Absolutely. What have you learned about personal resilience, the ability to adapt, and how does that play into happiness?
Oh, we got to adapt because life brings unexpected things all the time. Big things like COVID, or very personal things like, you know, hip pain that I never had before, right? You know, and so life is always bringing these things, so we adapt. We fix what we can, but we accommodate, we adapt. You know, I'm not as good at hearing in restaurants now, so I can't go to noisy restaurants. That means I have to choose my restaurants more carefully if I'm going to see people. And we have people over more because it's quieter in our house than it is in most restaurants. Those are just small ways that I need to adapt in order to keep my life going in the ways I want it to.
All right, we've got 2 questions from our audience after this that were submitted. But before we get to that, how can someone hold on to hope if they find themselves in a phase of life where they don't have really great, warm relationships?
Okay. Well, the hope is, so in our book, The Good Life, the last chapter is titled, It's Never Too Late. And we have stories in there about how people who thought they didn't have good relationships and were never going to, found them later in life. Not romantic relationships, but also friendships where, we had one man who never had good relationships and he was pretty isolated. And then when he retired, he joined a gym and he found this group of people, not just that he went to the gym with, but that he went to movies with and that he, played gin rummy with, and they did, did all these things with. He said, and he wrote to the study and he said, I never imagined I would find friends at this point in my life. So first of all, don't give up. Don't give up hope. And then put yourself in situations where you're more likely to strike up conversations and make new friends, like, volunteering, like working towards something or doing a hobby where other people are there because they enjoy the same thing. Like your grandmother with painting, she probably took art classes and then found other people who like to paint, right?
Mm-hmm. She did.
She probably made a couple of friends that way.
She did.
Yeah.
She also was playing golf, so it was like, go paint, go to the Mexican restaurant, get some chips and salsa with everybody, and play golf. Those were her things. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's never too late to start.
Absolutely. Do you have any other practical tips for people that are looking to build relationships? Or is there anything, before we get into the audience submitted questions, that we haven't covered that you want to make sure to touch on?
Yes. One thing is that many people are introverts. We're all somewhere on a spectrum from being introverts to being extroverts. So I don't want people to take away the message that you have to be an extrovert to be healthy and happy. No, introverts are perfectly happy and healthy. They just need fewer people in their lives.
Right.
So if you're an introvert, you might only want 1 or 2 good, warm relationships. Everybody needs some. But some of us need many fewer, and that's perfectly fine, perfectly healthy. And so I don't want you to take away the message that there's anything wrong if you only want a few relationships, because a lot of people is more stressful for you. That's fine.
It's all about knowing yourself and knowing what works for you too.
Exactly.
All right, well, I want to get to our audience questions. So this question was submitted. Older adults often move to a new place, whether it be closer to family, into a senior living community, or to retire somewhere warm. How can someone go about making friends in a totally new environment? This is a great question.
Yes, it is a great question. And it's all the things we've been talking about. So if you think about, what do you tell your kids and grandkids when they start at a new school? You say, join clubs. Get involved in activities, because that's how you make friends. Well, as grown-ups, it works the same way for us. So if you move to a new community, if many of your friends have moved away, again, join things, volunteer, do those things that we know help people make new connections.
What if you have limited mobility and it makes it difficult for you to get out and about? Do you have any recommendations?
Yes. Use some of these online connections. So join a club that meets online. There are book clubs that meet online, right? There are online courses for older adults where you'll have someone teach something. Like one of my friends took a course on politics that he was really interested in. Another took a course on opera. Another, and you can do that online with other people and get to know other people in small groups. So if your mobility isn't so good, the other thing is invite people over if you're in a situation where you can have people over, because many people will be willing to come to you if you can't go to them.
Yeah. Well, and I think so often, sometimes people probably think, well, I have to perfectly clean my house and I have to do these things, and that feels like more work. And so, but the reality is, like, no one cares. It's really about just being together and building that connection.
Exactly, exactly.
No one cares if your house is clean. That's what I want to say. People care, but no one cares if your house is clean or not. It really is about just building that connection and being together.
Exactly, exactly.
And you never know how much that other person needs it as well. So.
Right, right. Often people are so flattered to be invited over. Oh, you want to see me? Because they often it's a great compliment to be asked to do something. People love to be asked.
So tell me just a little bit, there's this another audience submitted question. Is there any data from the study that speaks to how much money you need to be happy?
There is some data. It's not from our study, but from other good studies that show that the money you need is the money to get your basic needs met, right? So you need to have food security, right? You need to have a good roof over your head. You need to be able to get health care, right? All those require money. So they actually did a study a few years ago that showed that in the US, people needed really about $75,000 a year minimum for average household income and that until you get to that level of income, you get happier with every dollar you earn extra. But that, once you get to a certain threshold of having your needs met, then you could make 10 times as much or 100 times as much. You don't get that much happier. So wealth doesn't make us happy. Getting our basic economic needs met, yes, that makes us happy.
So if we're thinking about just summarizing this entire conversation we just had, which has been wonderful. Thank you so much, Bob, for being with us. We're talking about we want to get with people. We want to build relationships. What are some of those other things that you think are so important?
Remember that everybody is facing challenges. So when you start to feel like, oh gosh, I'm the only one and I'm an outlier and I'm not like other people, it's really important to remember that everybody is facing challenges, and particularly getting older is hard for all of us, me included, right? And so don't let yourself fall into that mindset of, I'm old, nobody wants me anymore. That's not the truth. And all you have to do is reach out a little and be with other people, older people in particular, to remind yourself, oh no, we're all sharing this together. And it really helps to share the challenges of getting older with other people.
Yeah, let's just reach out and take that first step, right? That first bit of vulnerability, first bit of courage, you never know where it could lead. It could lead to some of the most beautiful, life-giving relationships of your life, even later in life.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Bob, thank you so much for joining us today. This was an incredible conversation.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. You can learn more about Bob at the links you see here. Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of The Grateful Life. Join us for our next episode on Thursday, March 27th, where we'll be talking about the Over 60 Guide to a Capsule Wardrobe with our guest, Michelle Barrett. You can view previous episodes and keep an eye out for info on upcoming episodes at brookdale.com/webcast. This webcast will be available to watch again at any time on the Brookdale YouTube channel. Please share this with your friends, family, caregivers, and anyone else you think would find it helpful. We will see you soon.